Now that we know what we can call pieces of sentences, clauses, phrases, independent clauses, dependent clauses, now we can talk about how we join those ideas up and the little marks we use to do that. So we're going to look at punctuation. This time we're going to look at commas, and we're going to throw in apostrophes at the end too. So the comma. Commas are the most misunderstood punctuation mark. That's a comma right there. For example, sometimes you hear people say, just put a comma wherever you pause in a sentence. That's not right. There are rules to govern where and when you should use a comma. There are rules. So we're going to look at those rules. Comma use number 1. Use commas to separate items in a series. Here's an example. Haley went to the store and bought milk, bread, and eggs. So you're using commas to separate the various items in the list. Now this comma here, the one that goes right before the and, is called an Oxford comma. And people debate about whether or not you need it. But I think, and I will fight to the death anyone who says otherwise, that the Oxford comma is important, not necessarily because of when you do need it, when you are separating two items in a list, but when you don't need it. So for instance, look down here. I dedicate this award to my parents, Debbie and Phil. Now, if we don't put the comma there, then it seems to imply that Debbie and Phil are the parents. But if we have the comma there, then the sentence reads, I dedicate this award to my parents, Debbie and Phil. His parents are one thing, separate from that is this woman named Debbie, and separate from her is this person named Phil. So now it becomes 3 things in the list, parents, Debbie, and Phil. So if you use it when you're separating items in a list, you never lose clarity. You never make it more confusing. But if sometimes you don't include it, then in a situation where it could be ambiguous whether you need the comma or not, if you always add the comma when you need it, then it's clear. Comma use number 2. Use a comma before a conjunction when linking 2 independent clauses. Jake is sick of his friends having a crush on his older sister. That's an independent clause. But he's downright disgusted when they start checking out his mother. That is also an independent clause. We can use a comma and a conjunction to link independent clauses, but you've got to have the comma. You can't just have the conjunction. Comma use number 3. Use a comma to separate a dependent clause from an independent clause, if the dependent clause comes first. After they left the house, that would be a dependent clause, comma, Katie realized the garage was wide open. You need the comma when the dependent clause comes first. If we move this to after, Katie realized the garage was wide open after they left the house, then you wouldn't need the comma. But if the dependent clause comes first, you need a comma there. Comma use number 4. When starting a sentence with certain adverbs, however, therefore, nevertheless, moreover, stuff like that, use a comma after the adverb. Also, when using the adverb in the middle of the sentence, put commas on both sides. So if you start a sentence with however, you should always have a comma afterward. However, those foods make him gassy. If you have the however in the middle of the sentence, you need commas on both sides. Those foods, however, make him gassy. Comma use number 5. Use commas to separate any inessential word or phrase from the rest of the sentence. So here's a sentence. After dinner, if you don't mind, I will be leaving for home. Now, we don't need this. Without it, it would say, after dinner, I will be leaving for home. That's really the essential stuff, right? The if you don't mind thing is kind of just being polite. So because it's unnecessary, the reader needs to see that it's sort of separated from the rest of the sentence. It's not a part of the main sentence, so you put it in commas. Here's another example. Gerald, glaring at John with fury, did not like guys talking to his girlfriend. So Gerald would be the subject. Here's your verb. So this stuff is just sort of descriptive. It's not really necessary to the main grammatical part of the sentence. So you put it in commas. Comma use number 6. Use commas between some adjectives. LeBron James is fast, powerful, and intelligent. Commas separating things, the adjectives, various adjectives. Here's another example. My wife made a moist, delicious cake, using a comma to separate the word moist from the word delicious, because they're both adjectives. Now, sometimes you don't need a comma. I bought a black baseball glove. Black baseball, in this case, is describing the kind of glove. So those are both adjectives. But you wouldn't want a comma here. So the way to decide whether or not you need a comma is to imagine the word and instead of the comma. So LeBron James is fast and powerful and intelligent. Like, that makes sense. My wife made a moist and delicious cake. That makes sense. So comma, comma, comma. I bought a black and baseball glove. That does not make sense, so you don't need a comma. Comma use number 7. Use a comma before a quote. According to Dr. Hillary, comma, yearly checkups went out with the Stone Age. Or, Bob Dylan once said, comma, he not busy being born is busy dying. You always want a comma before the actual quote. Notice there's a space in between them. They're not connected. There's a space between the quote and the punctuation mark, but there is definitely a comma. Now on to the punctuation mark that could compete with the comma, perhaps, for most often confused in student writing, the apostrophe. Looks like that, it's like the cat's fur or something, apostrophe. Apostrophe use number 1. Indicate missing letters in contractions. So if we take a word like cannot, it's 2 syllables. Sometimes we like to be a little quicker with the way we say things. So we reduce it to a 1-syllable word, can't. But we got to take out some letters to do that, particularly an N and an O. The apostrophe indicates that we took some letters out from this spot right here. Apostrophe use number 2. This is the confusing one. Indicates possession. So, the green car's door was scratched. The door belongs to the car. So apostrophe S indicates that possession. In the parking lot, the car's wheels were all slashed. So this is singular, apostrophe S. If we've got more than one car whose wheels were slashed, we need a way to indicate that we're talking about plural here. So in that case, the apostrophe goes after the S. If you've got a plural possessive, as in this case. Unless you have a plural where you don't add S. Most plurals we add S, right? I have one phone. I have multiple phones. I have one book. I have multiple books. We add S to make most things plural. But some words are plural without having an S, like the word people or the word children. In that case, you would just add apostrophe S because it would look weird to go like that. And that is all for commas and apostrophes. Mindeman out.